about trauma. If you guys want to even move up a little bit, or if you're not, it's okay too. I'm sure you guys can hear us. I'm just going to give you just a little overview of trauma before we get started, because Brittany and I will be presenting next week. And in our presentation, we don't actually talk a lot about trauma. We just talk about some strategies, which we'll talk about today. But I do want you guys to have an idea of what trauma is. A lot of us recognize the word trauma when we're thinking of like Vietnam vets and people have been to war. But actually, everybody has been through some form of trauma. And it's actually harder for our kiddos because their brains aren't fully developed. And so they have sometimes bigger reactions and different responses than we as adults do. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes we as adults act exactly the same way. What I just want you guys to think about is when trying to decide like if a child's behavior, is this a behavior or is this trauma? My recommendation is that we always just assume it's trauma. Kids are never going to walk into our classrooms and say, hey, by the way, I had this really traumatic event happen last night and I want to talk to you about it. They'll come in and destroy your library. So we just want to assume that when kids are having big behaviors that there's some type of trauma. Regardless, what we know is that kids' brains don't fully develop until the age of about 24 to 28. And so whether it's a behavior or whether it's trauma, a lot of times it's the brain states that we're talking about. And the fact is that they can't access parts of the brains that haven't developed if they haven't developed. So the other thing to remember is that trauma is not necessarily a memory. Like, oh, I remember that one time. Like for us as an adult, we can think of things, but sometimes we don't even put those things as trauma. Trauma is actually stored in our body. And that's why kids respond a lot of times physically, and they're not sitting and having a discussion with us. So even kids that, infants that we don't think have a lot of memories can respond to trauma because it's stored in their bodies. Which means the younger the child, the more vulnerable they are because the brain is developing. So anything else that we should talk about on that? Oh, there was a big study, the ACEs study, and if you guys haven't heard about it, I highly recommend that you look into it. The ACEs study was done over 20-30 years, and basically what they discovered is that people who had adverse childhood experiences or forms of trauma in their childhood were more susceptible to mental and physical illness. And it's actually an excellent study and it explains a lot of what our kiddos are going through. But it relates almost like every physical illness that adults suffer from to adverse childhood experiences. And what they say is if we aren't able to manage some of this stuff right away, then it's going to affect us kind of throughout our lives. So very interesting stuff. I highly recommend. We're just going to kind of ask you to change your mindset a little bit as we talk about trauma today. A lot of times when we are talking about behaviors, we're looking for how do we get this behavior to stop. And what we want you guys kind of thinking of, you're welcome to come and, yeah, absolutely. What you want to think about is we're not trying to get the behavior to stop. We're trying to help the student learn a new way to respond to the things that are going on. So a lot of times what we need to change is ourselves, and that will help change the student. Do you want to?
I think the other thing too that really stuck out to me with trauma is it's changing, the medical field is changing their definition of trauma. We often think it had to have been this like awful, terrible experience, but it's actually in some cases our society, the way it's running, creates trauma. So they're defining trauma as chaos, powerlessness, helplessness. So if you think about the lack of interactions with adults, the loud environment, like there's always TVs on, or maybe people are yelling at each other, or that can all lead to dysregulation in your body, which in turn causes trauma. I think that changing my mindset there was like, oh my goodness, like a lot of our kids are probably walking into our classrooms with this sense of chaos, like kids banging, or when they're playing with toys, they're like this, and you're like, whoa, that it's probably because their internal regulation is, they don't know what even to do in silence anymore because it's so loud and so chaotic. So I think to think about that also being trauma is chaos, powerlessness, and helplessness.
want to share a little bit about our story?
Yeah, so I think it's really easy to come up and be like, here's trauma, here are the things you need to do, and more strategies that we need to get better at or implement in our classrooms. But what we all like to hear is, did this work? And did you do it? And how have you done it in personal experience? So I want to share with you just a story of a student I've had in our classrooms, and he got removed from one of our community sites. And he just had really, really, really big behavior, which, I mean, makes all of us super nervous. So he was a room clearer. He would clear classroom, run around, throw everything. He was a biter. He sent a couple of the employees to the hospital. So, I mean, big behavior, things that make our own, like, regulation go awry. Wouldn't you say, Angela? Like
Yes,
that's
this is the type of kid that when we know we're going to have to handle them, we get scared ourselves, which is natural.
Yes. So that was our response. So being in the public schools, we knew he was coming to our classrooms, to one of our classrooms, and he was coming in 2 days. And so we had a weekend to get prepped and ready to go. And just to be completely honest, my heart rate like pumps just thinking about it, because you somehow have to prepare the receiving teacher, their entire team, and their entire classroom for this kiddo who could possibly destroy their room and hurt them and hurt someone else and hurt himself, right? So it makes us nervous, and we just need to acknowledge that those are real emotions. And so, needless to say, we really worked on these two main things that Angela and I are going to talk about: love, relationship connection, and structure. Really clear expectations and clear understanding of what he needs to do and what his expectations are throughout the day. And within 4 days, we put him in 2 restraints, one lasting about an hour and a half. So like a really intense experience. I cried because it was so intense, because he was like, no one can love me, everyone hates me, I'm such a bad kid. And it's really hard to listen to that. Like, here's a 4-year-old, you shouldn't be in this state of mind yet, like as a 4-year-old. But I'm here to tell you that with these practices, 4 days, you guys, 4 days, it went from an hour and a half to about 15 minutes to about a minute. And I counted up the other day, we went 12 weeks without having any behavior. And he also, it's super fun to watch, because he would regulate and he'd be like, oh, that makes me so mad. And he would go to the calm down space and he would just sit there, and he found the strategies that worked for his body. And he also, I would be in coaching another student, and he would literally be like, hey, Miss Brittany, I think I can do that better than you. So he would just step in and be like, here's what we need to do. And like, I remember coming back to the office and being like, he's got these skills mastered. Like, he knows how to do this. And so I've had 6 kids in my classroom with trauma who have been removed from programs, and every single one of them have been successful based on these strategies. So I want to be a testament that this works. I promise you. And yeah, we're excited to share those.
So I'm going to share a little bit about love. That is my favorite. So when I come into your classroom, you'll hear me say, like, what is relationship? Like, what is connection with that child? And it sounds so cheesy, but this is the most important step. Nurturing and responsive relationships is the bottom tier in PBIS. This is the most important when we're dealing with any child, but especially with children with trauma. A majority of trauma for children takes place within relationship. So to heal kids from trauma, we have to heal within relationship as well. So I'm going to just share 5 steps with you on what that can look like for the love piece, or relationship and connection, and then Brittany will share a little bit on structure. The first one is knowing your triggers and how to regulate. So when we are dealing with kids in trauma, those big behaviors like we were talking about earlier, they're going to trigger you to have a response. We get angry, we get upset with children, all of those things happen. There's a couple things to think about. One is just called like the pause. Before we make an action, when we have that heightened state of emotion, pause and breathe. We can't go into a state with a dysregulated child, dysregulated ourselves. Like, think about when something big happens in the classroom, anybody who is like, everybody calm down, does not ever calm the classroom down, right? To calm a student down, we actually kind of have to take that they recommend 3 deep breaths, calm, and then walk into the situation. I recommend having a line too that you use. When I started working on this with my own children at home, I always tell people I used to have like this big fake smile because I was really trying not to freak out, but it was like, what are you doing? So I use the line, it looks like you're having a hard time or you have a problem right now. So you'll probably hear me say that in the classroom a lot, like it looks like you have a problem. That's like my go-to. I don't want to have to think right now and I need to stop this behavior from occurring. So I'm going to come over calmly and I use that line every single time. One of the things I wanted to think about is that when kids are struggling, crying, hitting, biting, tantruming, all of those things, how much more powerful it is to say, I see you're having a hard time. And just recognizing and validating that kids are struggling and they need us to help them to calm down. For me, it's not that is automatically what's going to calm a child down, but over the long run, when children know you're a safe place to fall on, they do calm down quicker. And think about how you are with your friends. Who do you want sitting on the couch next to you when you're having a horrible moment? Somebody who's like, if you would just calm down, or somebody who's like, I'm just gonna sit here with you. And we wanna be that person who's like, I'm just gonna sit here with you until you're ready.
And when you say it, like, to go into these situations not taking anything personally. This is literally where I would say our adult brain needs to step up and say, this child didn't wake up to hurt me today. He didn't think, oh, I'm gonna hurt Miss Brittany or make her mad. Like, no child wakes up. And we have to like know that and trust that in the deepest parts of us to know, oh, this is nothing personally. When he takes a block to my body, it's not because of me. Like, and that helps me, at least for me, to regulate during that experience.
Because what we have to think about is we're social creatures. We're all seeking connection. We're all seeking validation. I don't care if you're 73 or if you're 4. You're seeking connection and validation. Our brains are based on relationship. We grow and we flourish based on relationships in our lives. We as teachers actually have the ability to change the life of a child. It takes one person who believes in you to change your life. And that's what science shows. So we can be that one person when that kid is struggling that can, as cheesy as it sounds, can love them through those moments. And then we're gonna provide them with skills also. So love doesn't just solve all the problems, we're gonna provide them with the skills that they need. It's important though, connection, eye contact, playfulness, touch, which one am I missing?
Presence.
And presence. So what kids are seeking is connection with us. Those are the 4 steps of connection. There's things that we can do every single day to kind of build that connection with students. A lot of people have the greeting at the beginning of their day with like, what do you guys, somebody in here does a greeting. Do you guys do a greeting? You guys, and who else? So what do? Handshake, fist bump, hug, it's you guys, I don't want to talk to you. They say that statistically, you do a greeting actually decreases behaviors by 20% on the days that you do a greeting. So it's a connection activity that's just saying, I see you, I love you, yeah. And just getting down at kids level and saying that, I'm so happy you're here today. We had that conference not that long ago, and a lot of people got worried that we couldn't ask questions, like when kids came in the classroom. And one of the things that we talked about that I want you guys to think about is how meaningful is that first interaction that you have with a student. Think about how when you walk in the day, how your teacher or principal or how somebody responds to you. If you walk in and you're having a hard time and they say, hey, how's it going today? Or is everything okay? Feels a lot different than, hey, how's it going? Can you please go get your stuff put away? We have stuff to do today. So really starting off that day and building that connection. And I'm not gonna talk a lot about it here and right now, but as I come out to your classrooms, we'll be talking about I love you rituals, which are just little things you can do, like row your boat. They remind me of like peekaboo that we do with babies, but we have some of those games that are for some of our older kids that are all about connection. The third one, find something in common. So simple, but so important. they may be 4, but, I would, my kiddos, whenever we'd see their teacher, like at Applebee's or something, my kids are always like, Mom, they're in public. Cause they don't think of us as like humans, right? They're like, you must never leave the building, you're just stuck here. So, which is absolutely not true. So really think about how can I connect with these kids? When those kids are kids who are having big behaviors, seek deeply. Like, I don't care, kids eat pizza, find something that you can sit down and be like, yeah man, I hate pizza, but I will love some pizza if you love pizza for that moment, if that makes us friends. But even as adults, connection on things in common. So like, I know I've talked about this before, but this is so important. Like I'm a Notre Dame fan, so whenever I find somebody else who's a Notre Dame fan, like I'm automatically like, I love you so much. You are my other person. And they could be the worst person ever, it doesn't matter to me anymore, because you have reached my heart. So that's what kids are looking for, is just to be like, hey, I'm in your club, we're friends, buddy. So looking for those connections, and we make those connections through conversation, through sitting with our kids and loving on them. The next 2 I'm gonna talk about are a little bit more difficult. The 4th one is called like uploading and downloading your calm. So it kind of connects that first piece, like knowing your triggers and how to regulate. But think about that presence that you have and the energy that you're bringing to the situation. If you have a child that is freaking out, and even if you're stressed and that's stressing you out, they're gonna feel that. So one thing that we kind of ask you to do is to kind of use your words and your energy to help calm kids down. So if you have a child that's freaking out, what I try to get kids to do is kind of try to get some eye contact with you. And as they do, just, so, she doesn't have to freak out. But just start taking some deep breaths with kids. It activates their mirror neurons. So think about like when somebody yawns and then everybody in the class yawns. Those are your mirror, neurons kicking in. I know, you're like, I gotta hold it now. So, those are your mirror neurons, use them. Like, that's not something you can control. So when you have kids that you notice are kind of freaking out, it's a very natural way to just start calming kids, without even using any words. I'm just gonna sit with you, I'm gonna hold you. And I try to make kind of even a deep breath, so that their body can hear that and it
See, I can't.
and it begins to
always have
calm.
deep breaths.
Taking those 3 deep breaths is helping kids. We'll talk about brain states. I'm gonna kind of wait till after structure. We'll talk about brain states a little bit. But any of you who've had me in my room have had to listen to something on brain states at this point in time this year. So we just wanna move kiddos from that bottom brain to that top brain. 3 deep breaths is one of the things that helps move us up. And then the last one is called shifting from judging to noticing. This is the hardest thing I'm going to ask you to do. I am practicing it in my life right now, and I have not successfully made it through a day not doing this, so maybe I'm super judgmental. But what I want you to think about judging to noticing is that when we use judgment-based words, that triggers emotion in us. When we say things like, so I'm trying to think of one. Like,
I know, now my brain's.
so a lot of times with kids,
Like this. Can you come up with something like this?
so judging to noticing, judging would be, Brittany, you look angry, your arms are crossed. So I'm automatically assuming like what Brittany's doing, but Brittany could just be relaxing. Noticing is, oh, Brittany, I noticed your arms are crossed and your legs are crossed. Yeah. And we just speak to what kids are doing. So we try to remove judgment. I've been talking about this a lot. I have a 20-year-old, and sometimes I don't know why she wears the outfit she does. And then I comment on them, and I'm like, why are you wearing that? And she's like, because I like it. And I'm like, and you look beautiful. Super sorry I did that again. I don't mean to do it. It's just I spit it out all the time. The other one is like even saying thank you to kids when they do something. So I might say, okay, time to go to the carpet. And I'll be like, walk to the carpet, Brittany. And then I go, thank you. That's telling Brittany, you're doing that for me and not for Brittany. So even that comes like with some judgment, and I'll tell you what, I cannot get rid of that. I do it every time. I have to be like, good job, or thank you. So work in progress. But even just noticing, shifting from that judgment to noticing. when you're having a kid that is having a problem, just stick to noticing words especially. I noticed you're sitting, I noticed your arms are crossed, your face is getting red. You're trying to hit me with that. Just stick with those noticing words. Those triggering words can send us back downstairs in our brain. So it is one of the keys to self-regulation, they say, noticing, because it helps kids notice there's another part of them.
And I think that comes with like that greeting, right? So we talk about how asking questions is a withdrawal from kids'